All right. Hi everyone. Today we're gonna be talking about basically how you would handle errors, how you would um handle a sync like in a cleaner way. So if you look at our controller method right now, right, we have a try and we have a catch block here, and when we're next in this, and if you look at all the controller methods, we're doing the same thing across like all our controller methods, right? And so there's a principle in software engineering called DRY, like don't repeat yourself, right? And if you imagine, like, by the time we're done, like we want to build, like we're building like a library API for like Kigali Public Library, right? So for now, we're just dealing with like books, but you can imagine we would be having like 50 controller methods, and we will be repeating ourselves like 50 times, right? So it just makes sense to like find like a cleaner way to like abstract this so we don't have to repeat ourselves, right? So it's totally valid to do this, right? You will see lots of people do this, but then there's like a more cleaner way to do this, and you don't have to like repeat yourself like all over and all over the time. So if you come to I'm going to show you an article that talks more about this. So basically, you could write like a middleware, right? That basically does all of this for you, so we don't have to repeat ourselves, right? So I'm gonna paste this article on Slack, and you can like just you can read through it. So, but basically, right, you have a middleware like an async handler, and then you can wrap like a controller methods within them, right? So this will resolve like to the controller methods being called, and if there's an error, it would catch that and call like the next from call like the next function with that error, right? So it's essentially like the same thing we've been doing here, but now I'm just being making it reusable, right? So I'm just gonna in here I'm just gonna create like this called async the JS, right? Up in our middlewares, right? I'm gonna create like a new middleware called async the JS, and then that's gonna handle this is just gonna do all like the it's just gonna handle like asynchronous operations for us, right? So some people might not by prefer not to call this a middleware, right? Depending on who some people might think call this maybe like, for example, an utility function, because it's basically an utility function, right? But for me, I just see it as I think it's a middleware, right? So because yeah. All right, so I'm just gonna copy this. I'm just gonna copy this. I'm gonna copy this, right? I'm gonna copy this and paste this, right? And then we're gonna module, right? That exports async handler, right? This is gonna make clean up our controller methods, right? So coming here now, right? We're gonna do like some major refactoring on our controller method, right? So to even make this easier, I'm just gonna take away this async, right? I'm gonna call this const. We're just gonna declare a variable with the same names of the controller methods we had before, right? So now I'm gonna import a sync handler, and yeah, VS Code automatically helps me do that, right? I'm gonna call this an asynchronous function, right? And gonna take out the catch. I'm gonna try and catch. I'm gonna take this out, right? And I'm gonna close this, right? All right. So there's some parentheses that hasn't been closed somewhere. Yep, I think this should be two. Okay, just to be sure. Okay. So yeah, actually. So so yeah. So let's just make this our lives easier. All right. So I'm gonna call this async function, right? I'm gonna call this async handler, right? And all right. So I'm gonna call this async handler, right? And it's gonna take in like a function, right? And that function is gonna this is where we're gonna wrap in like all our application logic, so we can actually paste that in here, right? And then we're gonna close like this async handler, right? And then this async handler would have access to our request, right? And and our response, right? And then our next, right? So this really cleans up things, right, for us. So if we go again, let's say let's try and create a book this time. We can actually test out the API out. So let's call this Chimamanda. Who else is in the class? Chimamanda Joel, right? And then we send this, you see. So this basically makes everything cleaner, and we don't have to like repeat ourselves all over again. So it's a way much cleaner way. um it's a way much cleaner way for us to handle this. All right, so so the next thing, so we're gonna repeat. Do this for like all the controller methods, and I'm gonna leave that. I'm gonna leave that for the rest of you, to do. So I'm gonna open like a pull request and assign that to you. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about mongoose middlewares. Right. So the same concept of so I'm just gonna open like the documentation because it just makes sense. That way, right? So I'm gonna mongoose middlewares, right? So essentially, middlewares in mongoose get triggered before something, right? So the whole concept of middleware is like middlewares generally is like something in between something, right? So before something happens, right? In the middle, like the name implies, right? So that's the same thing, right? So in mongoose, right? The middleware is like we're just gonna focus now on like uh we're gonna focus like on let's say this, right. So we can have like a middleware when you have a schema, right? So for example, before something happens, for example, before a document is saved to the database, we can trigger something, right? So yeah, like you can see this is like pre-hooks, right? So before a save happens, we can call something like this, and then we can call like next, right? So if we call next, means like everything is is okay. And actually it's the same way it works with express, right? If you call next, just next alone, everything is right? You can move on and proceed, right? But if you call next with an argument, it's considered an error, right? So it's the same way you would do like this in Express. It's the same way that same concept of middlewares kind of over to um to Mongoose, right? So this is not MongoDB, right? This is Mongoose, right? So this is an abstraction. Like Mongoose is an ODM that just makes your life more easier, right? Comes up like with some very cleaner abstractions for working with MongoDB, right? So yeah, and the middlewares are one of the these, right? And you would see would use middlewares like would use middlewares more like often across like different across different things. So let's go back to our model, right? Our book model, right? So in our book schema, right, we can put a middleware, right? So there's something called a slug. I'm just gonna Google it. Slug, 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 right? All right. Slug in URL slug. Yeah. So URL slug. I want to show you what an example of a slug looks like. Yep. All right. So you can see this, right? You have like probably seen like this kind of URLs before. So for example, imagine when there's a front end, like when we have a front end for our library API, right? So for example, you could have a slug for like for example so we can't say for example on the front end we can say for example home, right, slash the name of the book. But remember, books have spaces, right, and URLs can have spaces. So you would rather make like a slug, right? So you can see in here, like you have like each word in the being like separated with a that's a hyphen, right? With a hyphen, right? So that's the same thing. So in our model, just to show an example of how middlewares are used. So that's an example I would use. So let's create a field called slug, right? And slug, the type of slug, we're just gonna call it a string, right? So the type of slug, we're gonna call it a string for now. It's gonna be a string, and we don't want to put like any sort of validation or any stuff on it, so it's just fine to just define it as a string, right? So all right, so now we can, on our book schema, we can say book schema dot pre, right? So pre, if you hover over this, right, so it gives like can tell you, like we can put like pre certain like events, right? So already like VS Code helps your life, right? So you can see like before certain events you want to trigger like a middleware, so we can say pre-save, right? Before like this before this thing is saved, right? So and I think in this place asynchronous functions do not work. You have to use regular function because of like binding of the D's or something like that. So I think if you look at the example and where's the example? Not, I mean, not asynchronous function, sorry. Yeah, arrow functions do not work here. If you see, all the examples here are done with like the regular function syntax, not the arrow function syntax. So most of when you start like dealing with like the internals of mongoose, you should probably stay away from using arrow functions, right? Just use like the normal function syntax. All right, so yeah, so in here we're gonna have like a function, right? So in this function, yep, this function so pre-save, right? All right, and if you look at the example, it's the same thing, right? So yeah, and so now the good thing about this, now the this in this function, right, will refer to like uh the this in this function now will refer to like the document. So we can actually do this. We can say console.log this, right? So before this document is saved, right? Let's see what like the the this would be so and so I'm not sure if that's gonna work for a crate, because let's see. And yep, all right, so yeah, the this here refers to like the actual document itself, right? So before that document is saved, right? So we can do anything we want to do with this in this middleware, right? So for everything to be okay, when we for yeah, when everything is right and we don't have any error, what was that? When we don't have any error, right, we call like the next function, right? But remember, if we call this, then that's an error, right? All right, so so this library for creating a slug out of a string, right? So if you have a string and you want to create a slug like this, right, there's a library for doing that. So you don't want to like start writing functions to like join, fine. You could decide to do that on your own. That's fine. You could take like you could write a simple function that searches for, like, for example, splits like the array by by space, right? Split the string. You can split the string and then into space and then join all of them together, or filter out like spaces and all of that, and then join them with a hyphen if you want to. But there's a library for doing that called Slugify, and we're gonna use that library, right? So this is it's you can it's called Slugify, and you can simply like install it, right? So yeah, we're gonna install Slugify. We're gonna install Slugify. So just gonna go to another I'm going to go to another shell. Just going to delete one of these. Clear the shell. npm I slugify. right? All right. So that's gonna install Slugify for us, right? So it's gonna install Slugify for us. So we can require Slugify. So we can call this a Slugify, right? Typical way we'll do this stuff, right? Require Slugify, right? And if you, let's look at how to use this library, right? So your documentation should always be like your source of truth. Right now, I can't even remember at the top of my head how this library works, right? But when you call Slugify on some string, right, it gives you like a slug for that string, right? So that's how you would use like this library, right? So so in our case now, we want to take this. We want before like we save like the document, right? We want to take like the name of our book, right? And then create like a slug from that book, right? So we can say in this case we can say this the slug, right? This the slug, right? Equals to slugify, right? This dot this dot this dot name, right? We're gonna create a slug from the name, right? And I think it takes in an object that has an option, right? So we want to force like all the slugs to be lower, and then by default it uses a hyphen. If you want to use like an underscore or something, you're free, you can pass in that. So but in our case now, I'm gonna say these dot so we're gonna say like lower. I think lower. Let's just look at the library again for sure. Yeah, lower. So by default it's false, but I want all the slugs, all the letters in the slug to be uh true. Yeah. And that's right. So this gives now you remember when we created in the controllers, right? We didn't even in our API we didn't give a slug, right? But we're using like a middleware to dynamically like create that slug from the name, right? So we can actually yeah, we can test this out to see we can test this out to see. So let's let's hit our endpoint now. I know. Also, we can console the log. Actually, let's do this. Let's console the log. This again, right, and see the value. This, right. So this, right. All right. So just give it a few moments to make sure our thing we have established a database connection. Okay. Yep. Okay. Next is not defined. Um, should next come from here? Let me I have to read let me look at the documentation again. All right, yeah. So next needs to come as an argument to this function, right? Right. All right. So yeah. So if you look at our slug now, we have a slug called corporal hibiscus from the name. So it takes the string and creates a slug from that. So this is not like this is you could use this library for another thing. In this case, I'm just taking advantage of it to yeah, to create like a slug. All right, so I hope it makes sense up to this point. So if we console the log the value of this back to this other shell, right, you will see like the slug now is popular hibiscus. All right, so that's the concept of middlewares, and we'll use middlewares for other things as we go in the course of the course. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about in this video is going to be something. So if you from like the other MongoDB videos I sent you guys, right? You would see someone maybe they will create a field here called created at, right? Created at, right? And this will be like this would be this would be this would be dates, right? So dates is a yeah, is a global object available in like in JavaScript, right, in Node.js too. I think it's put on the browser and in Node.js, right? So you would do a date dot now, right? And you call like this, right? And this will return you like the current date, right? But also, and you can do the same thing for updated at, right? Because you want to know when this record was created at and when it was updated at, right? So we could do this, right? But an easier way is we said mongoose is a mongoose is an ODM, right? So it makes mongoose has like some basically some utilities that makes your life like the common things you would have to do just makes your life easier. So you could pass in an argument here, and then you say timestamp, right? True. Now, if you say timestamp true for every record that's created from this model, right? Mongoose will create like both a created a field and updated a field, right? So you don't have to do that manually. But you can decide to do that manually if that works for you. But like, if I'm always an advocate of like if there's something that easily does something for you, like if this is this is inbuilt into the library, just use that rather than trying to do something repeat yourself manually. All right. So now let's create like a couple of records with this. Like what book am I currently reading now? Um um let's say for example this is the shortest history of Germany. It's the book that's right on my table right now, and it's written by who? I didn't even look at the name. James Howes, right? All right, all right. James James Howes, right? All right. So we'll call this the category will be history, right? All right. So now if we create this, now you see this automatically gives us a created at field and a and the updated at field, right? And we you see like the timestamp for this, and it creates like a slug for us, right? So another thing I think you should all take note of, and we will talk. So this date is a specific type, right? It's a type of, it's not like you can take this and convert it into like maybe year, date, month, time, and all of that. But this is a format that comprises both the time and the date together. All right. So yeah, so that would be it all. That would be all of it for this particular video, and I've been able to cover I think everything. So please endeavor like to watch these videos, and when we will talk about like any questions you have like in we'll talk about any questions you have like in class. And I would assign like individuals like issues, so make sure like you accepted like the invitation to the organization, and I want to assign all of you issues, individual issues. uh yeah, you would have to like complete like all the remaining parts of this for us. All right. So yeah, see you guys in class.